Hey folks, and welcome to another video from A Plain Truth. Well, I've been wanting to get into this subject for a while, so I researched it a little bit and got into it a little bit more of late. Originally, it was the high trees, the no-tree forest with the giant stumps that we were seeing around the world being reported by the flat earthers about a year ago. But Mudfossil University, a gentleman there named Roger, has been chronicling evidence all around the world, everywhere around the world, of massive, massive fossilized giants in the mountains, in rock formations, and everywhere we see. And just remember, we still don't know how they built the pyramids. We don't know why they put the statues on Easter Island. We don't know in Baalbek, Lebanon, how they put up a 100-ton monument obelisk and stand them on end. They had technology we just simply did not understand. But if there were giants that were here, giants, sons of gods that came down to impregnate the daughters of men, there would have been giants down here pre-flood stages. And so the hypothesis is when the floods came, because these giants were abusing earthlings, that God came down and flooded them out. And here's one of the tree stumps I was talking about. These are massive, folks. And if you didn't have scale, you could easily say that was a tree stump. But these things are just massive. But carved into the stone around the world, we're seeing figures. I mean, this is not Photoshop, folks. And there at the bottom, you can see some possible blood and veins, like they were flash frozen in some way when Earth made dramatic changes. These, as far as I can tell, are real photographs that are in nature, that haven't been altered, that haven't been touched whatsoever. Maybe one or two of them have. That could be very possible. But when you see the list, the massive list of the different shapes and sizes, here's a turtle. And then we see animals all over the place as well. So were they fossilized when the Earth opened up the heavens? Well, it's possible, and at Harvard and Max Planck universities, they have certified mud fossils and roads from mud fossils as mud contains DNA as 100% valid. The research at Harvard and Max Planck years ago, and every institution I could find, this is Mudfossil University sent in his work, and then, quote, "I think we show convincingly that these sequences are authentic," end quote, says lead author Vivian Sloan of the Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. This is excellent confirmation that we have. We have an astonishing new way to study our early human ancestors, looking for their DNA in ancient sediments in places such as caves. Now, if this is true or not, who knows, but we're still researching and still finding out, just like flat Earth. Some people are questioning how can you get DNA from rock, but if there's enough bacteria, live organic matter, they can get it. But is it from the rock, or is it from the fossils of DNAs of the giants of men who used to live here on this Earth? Also note that we're missing one chromosome from the other animals, the other vertebrates on Earth. The 15th chromosome matches almost exactly with the missing chromosome that's blended in animals. Here's a fossil that they say is a vagina. A fossil of a vagina there as well. And here's another fossil of a giant foot. Now, were these carved in hard stone? It's not likely, folks. And the giants of men has been chronicled around the earth through the biblical days and far past beyond that, with massive giant skeletons have been found as well. And there are many books that showcase and present evidence. One of the most famous is Zachariah Stitchin and his 12 books about the Anunnaki and Enlil and Enlil. And I know he was a 33-degree Freemason, but that doesn't mean there's a lot of truth in what he's saying here. So did 100,000 years ago giants live here? Was the Nephilim here, the sons of gods to the daughters of men, and impregnate them? And here we see skeletons found in, these are actual skeletons that have been found in many different places of up to 30, 40 feet. But the fossil fuel they're talking about, the fossilized bodies that they're talking about here, creatures, they're talking miles, 2 miles in height. The giants of the Book of Enoch were 3,000 ells. That is 11,250 feet. That's over almost 2 miles there as well. 1/3 the height of Everest, which is 29,000 feet. So you can imagine how big they were. The pre-flood Titan giant fossils are strewn all over the place of the earth. Most of which originally said to be natural rock formations are actually fossils of pre-flood titans and giants. Fossils, soft tissue bodies encased in mudslides or floods. The tissues are invaded by minerals and the bones get replaced by minerals. The bones turn to stone, and the body fluids turn into crystallization. A titan is one that is gigantic in the size of power. The scriptures speak of giants that were as a result of the sons of God mating with the daughters of men. Genesis 6:1, quote, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth," verse 2, "that sons of God saw the daughters of men and were fair, and they took the wives of all which they chose." Volume 4, "There were giants on earth in those days, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men and bare children to them. They became the mighty men which are of old men of renown." The scriptures do not state the height that these giants grew to before the flood, but the book of Enoch does. The book of Enoch chronicles the true, much richer history than the King James Bible. And the mortal women became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. It's from the book of Enoch. Who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusations against the lawless ones. Sound familiar? It's going on today, folks. As you can see, 3,000 ells is over 2 miles in height. This seems unbelievable, but you will see from the giant fossils that the book of Enoch is correct. The evidence is irrefutable. The book of Daniel also speaks of other beings mixing their seeds with humans. Daniel 2:4-3, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men." And here we see more examples all around the world, in Turkey, I think this is also Turkey as well. We have in Peru, and you really need perspective to see these. That last one they said was a curled pet, and then here we can see a breakdown of this infamous sleeping giant. I think this may be Peru, but you can see the body shape, folks. It's very evident. This is a very clear shot that you can stop and pause and study if you want. I'd love to go down and visit this site. But right in my backyard, I have Mount Tamalpais and Mount Princess Tamalpa. And you can see to the left, that's the top of her nose, her breast going down to her feet. Coming down from San Francisco 101, you can look at it, and you can see Princess Tamalpa. I never thought of it until I started getting into mud fossil fuels, but there could be a princess lying in the mountain where I grew up and rode bikes and hiked all my life through. Here we see up in Washington, Mount Helena, the giant, as well. But we have to keep perspective that these were massive beings, huge beings, 2 miles in height, that cruised across the flat earth. Is it possible? Absolutely. And how do we know it's possible? Because we have massive archaeological evidence. Now, could have the big scale human bones, 30 feet tall, be made of chicken bones just like they did dinosaur? Absolutely. But what about these steps, folks? Who did they make these massive giant steps for? Unless they made them for giants. Or how about off the coast of Japan, where they have underwater pyramids with these huge, massive steps? Who would they made these for 300 feet down under the water off of Japan, and also in Mexico and other places as well? They were giants that lived here. Look at that. Look at who would have moved these stones. We still can't figure out how they built the pyramids. The Great Giza, 2.3 million stones that were erected up to 500 feet tall in perfect alignment, that sits in perfect alignment today. Look at how massive these are. Wouldn't it be fun to go diving and check these out? And then off the coast of Alexandria, we've got the giant statues as well from the Egyptians. And how many know there's pyramids in Antarctica? Many, many pyramids. Were they man-made? Are they there through nature? We just don't know. And finally, the fossil ancient skull of the plastic bottle is going to be left by humanity. This is our legacy. All right, I'm leaving you with Dorje Daka's takedown of the giants that lived there. It's very good. Please listen. Thanks for listening.
In Maine, giant skeleton was found, and with it, iron implements, copper bands covered with curious carvings. You find a lot of these reports of hieroglyphs, curious carvings from the Smithsonian to other researchers to town records. There seems there was another culture with a different language. Who you will see, 6'6", was rather large. Iron implements. You know, that's the thing, the argument that the Native Americans, if they could work with iron and create alloys with metal, why did they lose that capability? And it's a sophisticated thing. And this is in Gill, the town history. Possession of a copper tomahawk unearthed together with the skeleton of a gigantic Indian brought from the region of Lake Superior. History of Western Mass. Lake Superior is where the mines are, where they excavated 1.5 billion pounds of copper, and all that copper was found not only in the earthworks of the mound builders, but also all around New England. In Springfield, the trade routes were everywhere. They found shells in Springfield from the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, and there was this interaction, this sphere of trade all around the country. Giant skeleton, 8 feet high, that's ridiculous, Double row of teeth, we'll get to that part. So what was in the mounds when the Smithsonian and others excavated? The eyes of that extinct species of giant whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara as our eyes do now. Abraham Lincoln, he was parroting what everybody knew at the time, that there was a race that built these structures that was giant in stature. He went to Niagara Falls in 1848, and he was so enthralled with it, he wrote a 500-word meditation, and that's where that passage comes from. I'm sure nobody's ever seen that, and I wonder why. So, the New York Times has hundreds of newspaper headlines about what they found at the time. Over 9 foot high skeleton found, 9 foot in a Wisconsin mound. This one is 10 foot 9. This one is very interesting. Warren K. Moorhead. Moorhead was an archaeologist, one of the most famous ones at the time, and he unearthed maritime archaic burial sites in Maine. And they say his career was ruined because he theorized that one day they would find bones of the maritime archaic that were very old. Excuse me. And they would find them up in Nelliac Cove in Labrador and the northern climates. He was proven right 70 years later, but I have a feeling his career was ruined more because of this and less because of that. He started to find giant skeletons in copper armor, things like that in the mounds, all documented. And Moorhead he found an 8 foot, I'll get to that story, I don't want to get ahead of myself. But anyways, this is what he found in Tioga Point, Pennsylvania. 68 skeletons averaging 7 feet with many much larger. Specimens sent to the American Investigating Museum in Philly. Later, the museum claimed they were stolen and have never been seen again. That's a shame. So, you get these reports from Scientific American, American Antiquarian, the Smithsonian Records, New York Times, Town Histories. I have amassed now nearly 1,000 accounts of giant skeletons in ancient America. There are other authors who write books about these things, and you will see that it is a lot more well-known than one would think. So, the Native Americans talked about massive cemeteries filled with giant skeletons. They were dismissed as crazy, myths. Scientific American, a tradition of giants. That doesn't sound like an isolated case, a tradition. The Smithsonian, this is they have many accounts of 7 and 8 foot skeletons in their records in the ethnology reports from 1890 to 1894. One of the largest ones, 7 and 8 feet. My editor, Wayne May, Ancient American, a lot of articles are printed in this magazine about what we're talking about. This particular one was about 3 over 8 foot skeletons found in a Kentucky. The article was reprinted from 1873 in a Kentucky cave. This is the San Diego giant 8'4". I know it looks fake, but this is real. 3 scientists from the Smithsonian showed up. These guys were displaying this like a sideshow act at a World's Fair, some fair in San Diego. They found it 8'4" in a cave. Smithsonian agents, they examined it, they determined it was authentic. They did tests on it, they bought it for $500, and we haven't heard from it again. The Smithsonian has 18,000 skeletons of mound builders and Native Americans that nobody can look at. Yes, this was called the largest skull in the world in Texas, found by WPA workers in the 30s. Right there. They unearthed other large bones there. So, Carolyn Spark, head of the records at Texas Archaeological Research Lab, said, the particular specimen that you ask about, the large skull found at the Morehouse site in 1939, is noted in our paperwork as missing from the collection and has been for some time. This is the norm. When you investigate these things, when you talk to people, where are the skeletons? Unfortunately, a lot of times, there are some around, but a lot of them go missing. 10'9", this was found by the sheriff in Wheeling, Virginia. Another thing, reputable people found these things. Chief justices, judges, doctors. And doctors would always be brought in to look at these remains. They would measure them. The townspeople would be astounded. It would be in the records, as if, and they would say, like, as if never to forget on this day, this 9-foot skeleton was found, and there were people gathered round at the enormous creature from the Stone Age, or however they would speculate about it. So it's not, it is a well-known thing. The Lovelock skulls. Bat guano farmers in the 20s found a series of 8 and 9-foot mummified giants in Lovelock, Nevada. The skeletal remains went to, part of them went to the Humboldt Museum. Barbara Powell, the curator there, sent back an email saying, yes, in fact, we have some of the Lovelock skulls, the giant skulls. David Hatcher Childress, the researcher, showed these on the History Channel. It's in a back drawer, but it was on a History Channel special, and he showed the specimens. This is interesting. This is a site off Santa Rosa Island. Ralph Glidden works for the Hay Foundation as an archaeologist. He spent 10 years here, and he unearthed 3,781 skeletons. The largest was 9'2". The average was over 7 foot for 10 years. And here is the, right there, and this is courtesy of Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, over 7 feet tall. And this is the double rows of teeth. When you read these reports, you find double rows of teeth, unusually thick jaw, unusually thick skull, jawbones that can fit over the size of a large man. Just very strange skeletal remains that speak of a different race altogether. So this was found in Clearwater, Minnesota. The highly unusual skulls had double rows of teeth in both the upper and lower jaws. These reports are widely dispersed. This isn't just one guy who doesn't know what he's talking about. This is everywhere, hundreds of them. So after I went and I found the 8-foot double rows of teeth report, I went to the Pioneer Valley Museum to see if they knew anything about Sheldon and him finding these remains. So I went to the PVMM and I spoke with them. I sat down, I went through the records, and the nice gentleman there said, you may be interested in this. It is the scrapbook, the archaeological scrapbook of George Sheldon. And this was my Da Vinci Code moment. I just knew what I was going to find. And I had this, it was amazing. I had this electric shock ran through my body. It was quite a happening. So I opened it up, and what did I find? Sheldon, his entire scrapbook was filled with accounts of the mound builders, of theories about the race that they were, about a lot of conjecture about that they were a different race altogether. I'm sorry, let me interject here. The Smithsonian erroneously concluded in the 1890s, John Wesley Powell, of Grand Canyon exploration fame, he was the director of the Smithsonian. And for whatever political reason, maybe for a land grab, I don't know what was happening at the time that would account for this. And there's a lot of like Old Testament stuff mixed in the 1890s. There was undercurrents that formed opinions at the time. So Powell concluded that Native Americans, that mound builders were the ancestors of the Native Americans, and that was the end of the story. So that was put out, and that's what the rule that was to be followed. So everything else seemed to be buried and funneled into that really narrow passageway. So what you find here is Sheldon kind of railing against that theory. And then what I found was giant skeleton reports in his book, The Gill Skeleton. They found a giant skeleton in Gill. Mr. Sanderson gave the remains to the museum. To the museum. 7 and 8 foot skeletons in Ohio. There's reports of giant skeletons all throughout Sheldon's book, Northfield. The catalog of curiosities and relics. Right here, they had the remains of it says an over 8 foot skeleton at the museum. They had the Indian room before it was considered reprehensible to have Native American human remains, although I think they were mound builder remains, which might be a different thing. But anyways, they had giant skeletons from Northfield, Gill, and an over 8 foot one from Ohio that they reinterred sometime in the century. So that existed. It's in the records. They had it on display for many years, starting in 1883, which is very strange. So I read about 10,000 pages of historical, about town histories in Western Mass, and then I'm a technological neophyte, so I finally figured out I can use Google Books and do keywords, and it got me, I know, it's pathetic. So what I found was, this is from Sheldon's book, 7 foot skeleton, double rows of teeth, skull of remarkable thickness in Hadley. This is in Turner's Falls, 7 7-foot skeletons. History of Montague, 1910. 7 7-footers. This is in Rockingham, Vermont. The jawbone was of such size that a large man could easily slip it over his face, and the teeth, which were all perfect, were double. This is interesting. I'm looking into this and try to find if the skeleton still remains. The bones of this giant were of remarkable preservation. The skull is very thick. Teeth in both jaws are entire, all of them double. William Prescott of the city has preserved the largest skeleton. Boston Medical and Surgical Journal. That is not UFO magazine. That is, When the skeleton was measured, this is Middleborough, where I grew up. Dr. Morrill and others found it to be at least 7'8" with double rows of teeth in each jaw. Many more giant skeletons are found in Middleborough, actually. This is in Martha's Vineyard. Several giant ones were found. 7 feet high. An unusual feature was a complete double row of teeth, upper and lower jaws. This is what you find. You find the same curiosity, the same phrasings about these, we found, what the hell is this? Sorry, but, double rows of teeth. It just doesn't make any sense. And it is borne out in all these accounts. This was W.K. Moorhead, Warren Moorhead. He found 8-foot skeletons in Connecticut, the archaeologist I was talking about, whose career was ruined. He also found, this was in Bridgeport, Connecticut, earthen mounds there. In the Smithsonian 1891 report, it's listed in Bridgeport, Connecticut as having extensive earthworks in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So the mound builders had extensive earthworks in Bridgeport, and then you find 8-foot skeletons there also. Sorry to throw so much at you. The questions are, where are they, what's going on? This gives you a kind of a feel for what's going on here about the Smithsonian and their involvement in this. A large Indian mound was opened near Gasterville, Pennsylvania, by a committee of scientists from the Smithsonian. At some depth of from the surface, a kind of vault was found in which was discovered the skeleton of a giant measuring 7 foot 2 inches, ornamented with a copper crown. On the stones which covered the vault were carved inscriptions, hieroglyphs, and when deciphered, will doubtless lift the veil that now shrouds the history of the race of people that once inhabited this part of the continent. The relics have been carefully packed and forwarded to the Smithsonian Institution, and they are said to be the most interesting collection ever found in the U.S. The explorers are now at work on another mound in Barton County, Pennsylvania. 7'3", strange hieroglyphs that need to be deciphered. Copper crown. 130 years pass, and we've never heard this. This is American Antiquarian who wrote this report. These are scientists who took part in these digs. These just disappeared. One thing I found interesting when I was reading the reports, I found that a lot of them were for the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons of giant skeletons. And so I started to read the kind of secret texts of the Freemasons. I hope I make it to next week. And I would find the same kind of reports, giant skeletons, double rows of teeth. And embedded in the history, they believe, or they passed down, I think the Freemasons from the temple priests of Heliopolis in Egypt, I think there was a lineage of knowledge that has been passed down about the hidden history of the human race. And part of that is interwoven in this whole story, a lost civilization that's more than 12,000 years old that came to the United States and other places after a great flood. It's very interesting that you would find this same stuff in the texts of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. Very, very interesting. So what you find all around the planet are thousands of structures like this. Pumapunku, the pyramids, Nan-Madol, 500 million tons of quarried basalt brought from several miles across mountains in Micronesia, one of the most remotest places on Earth. Pumapunku, Bolivia, 17,000-year-old city of Tiwanaku in Pumapunku, where you have stone crosses dug into diorite, the second hardest substance on Earth. You would need CNC machines to do all the cutting, just things that boggle the mind. And we're told that we came from a semi-civilized state and now at the apex of civilization. Something is clearly wrong. That site proves it. There is much more evidence of older structures all around the planet. You don't find just one. That's all you find. Just like the giant skeleton reports. You don't just find one. Something's profoundly wrong in what we're being told.